You replay the argument in your head, not because anything was unresolved, but because they still don't get it. And that's what's eating you alive. Not the disagreement itself. Not even the outcome. It's the gap. The space between what you meant and what they heard. The silence where understanding should have been. And you keep going back to it, turning it over, rehearsing what you should have said, constructing the perfect sentence that would finally make them see. Here's the costly mistake most people make without ever naming it: they believe that being understood is the same as being at peace. It isn't. Needing to be understood is not a desire for connection. It's a surrender of your sovereignty. And until you see that, every conversation is a negotiation for your own self-worth. Let me say that again, because it matters more than anything else I'll tell you. Needing to be understood is not a desire for connection. It is a surrender of your sovereignty. That's the thesis. Everything else flows from it. Think about what actually happens inside you when someone misunderstands you. Your chest tightens. Your thoughts accelerate. You feel a pull, almost a gravitational force, to correct them, to clarify, to explain one more time, to find the right words, the right angle, the right tone that will finally crack them open and make them see your side. And you tell yourself this is reasonable. You tell yourself you just want fairness. You tell yourself anyone would want to be understood. And that's true on the surface. But underneath, something else is operating. Something you don't want to look at too closely. Because if you look closely, you'll see that what you're really doing is handing them the keys. You're saying, I cannot be okay until you see me correctly. I cannot be at peace until you agree with my version of events. My internal state is now dependent on your cognitive agreement. Do you see how insane that is? You have just made your peace of mind a hostage to someone else's perception. Epictetus understood this with a clarity that most people today still haven't reached. He was born a slave. He was beaten so severely his leg was permanently damaged. He lived with nothing, owned nothing, and had no control over whether he would be free or beaten or killed on any given day. And from that position of total external powerlessness, he arrived at one of the most liberating insights in human history. He said, essentially, that some things are within your power and some things are not. Your opinions, your impulses, your desires, your aversions, these are yours. Your body, your reputation, your property, what other people think of you, these are not yours. And the moment you treat something that isn't yours as if it were, you suffer. The moment you demand that the world conform to your expectations, you magnify your own pain. Now apply that to this specific problem. What someone else understands about you, that is not within your power. You cannot control another person's perception. You cannot control their interpretation. You cannot control the lens through which they filter your words, because every person listens through a lifetime of their own baggage, their own fears, their own projections, their own ego. You are not speaking into a neutral space. You are speaking into a mind that is already full. And yet you keep trying. You keep explaining. You keep justifying. You keep defending, as though if you just found the right combination of words, you could bypass all of their psychological conditioning and arrive at pure understanding. The truth nobody wants to say out loud is this: most of the time, people don't misunderstand you because you explained poorly. They misunderstand you because understanding you would cost them something. It would cost them being right. It would cost them their narrative. It would cost them the comfortable story they've already built about who you are and why you did what you did. And people will protect their story before they protect the truth. Every single time. So when you keep explaining, keep justifying, keep defending, what you're really doing is asking them to sacrifice their self-image for the sake of accuracy. And almost no one will do that. Here's what nobody tells you about the need to be understood. It's not really about them. It's about you. It's about a fracture inside you that you're trying to repair through external confirmation. When you know who you are, when your relationship with yourself is solid and unshakable, someone else's misunderstanding doesn't threaten you. It's just information. It's just their map, which doesn't match your territory. You note it. You move on. But when your self-knowledge is shaky, when you're not fully sure of your own motives, when there's a part of you that suspects maybe they're right, then their misunderstanding feels like an attack. Because it's not just their opinion. It's a mirror showing you the version of yourself you're afraid might be true. And that's why you can't let it go. That's why you replay it. That's why you construct your defense like a courtroom argument, building exhibits and calling witnesses in your own mind. You're not trying to convince them. You're trying to convince yourself. Carl Jung called this the shadow, the parts of yourself you refuse to acknowledge, the disowned material that operates beneath your awareness. And one of the most common shadow expressions is the compulsive need to be seen correctly by others. Because if enough people see you a certain way, you can outrun the doubt. If everyone agrees you're the good one, the reasonable one, the one who was wronged, then maybe it's true. Maybe you don't have to sit with the uncomfortable question of your own complexity. But here's the cost. And I want you to feel this, because the cost is enormous. Every time you need someone to understand you, you place a piece of your identity in their hands. You fragment yourself across 100 external mirrors. And you can never collect them all. There will always be someone who misreads you. Always. A coworker who thinks you're arrogant when you're actually terrified. A family member who thinks you're selfish when you're actually exhausted. A friend who thinks you don't care when you care so much it's eating you from the inside. And each one of those misreadings will pull you back into the spiral. Each one will cost you sleep. Each one will drain energy you should be spending on building your life, not defending your image. You still don't feel whole. You still don't feel like you. And you won't, not until you stop outsourcing your self-concept to people who were never going to hold it carefully. So what do you do? How do you actually break this pattern? Not with a platitude. Not with a mantra. Not by telling yourself you don't care, because let's be honest, you do care, and pretending you don't is just another form of defensiveness. You break it through practice. Through concrete, daily, sometimes uncomfortable practice. Here's where we get specific. First, you have to learn to tolerate the anxiety of being misunderstood. This is not a trick of mindset. This is physiological. When someone misreads you, your nervous system reacts. Your heart rate goes up. Your jaw tightens. You feel a pressure in your throat, an urge to speak, to correct, to explain. That urge is not a command. It's a sensation. And sensations pass. The mistake most people make is treating that urge as evidence that they must act. As though the discomfort of being misunderstood is a signal that something is wrong and must be fixed immediately. But the anxiety of being misunderstood doesn't mean you're doing something wrong. It doesn't mean the situation is broken. It means you're a human being who cares about how others perceive you, and that caring is colliding with your deeper need for sovereignty. So the practice is, feel the urge, and don't act on it. Not every time. Not perfectly. But increasingly. Someone mischaracterizes what you said in a meeting. You feel the pull to clarify. You breathe. You let it sit. You let the silence do what you're Words cannot. And you watch what happens. 9 times out of 10, the misunderstanding resolves itself or becomes irrelevant within hours. The thing that felt unbearable at 2 in the afternoon is forgotten by dinner. And you learn something that no amount of explaining could ever teach you: you can survive being misunderstood. It doesn't kill you. It doesn't even diminish you. It just is. Second, stop volunteering explanations. This is a behavior, not a feeling. You don't have to feel different to act different. You just have to catch yourself. When you make a decision and someone asks you why, notice the impulse to construct a narrative. Not a simple answer. A narrative. A justification. A case for the defense. Because that's what it is. You're building a case. You're presenting evidence. You're anticipating objections. And in doing so, you're implicitly saying, I need you to agree that my decision was reasonable. I need your validation to feel secure in my own choice. Try something different. Try giving the shortest true answer and then stopping. I decided to. It felt right. It's what I needed to do. And then silence. Let the silence hang. Let them be uncomfortable with the lack of explanation. Their discomfort is not your responsibility. Your responsibility is to your own integrity. And integrity doesn't require a footnote. Third, and this is the hardest one, stop defending yourself against characterizations you know are false. This feels deeply counterintuitive. Everything in you screams that you must correct the record. If someone calls you selfish and you're not selfish, you must prove you're not selfish. If someone says you don't care and you do care, you must demonstrate that you care. But here's what you're actually doing when you defend against a false characterization: you're treating it as though it has enough weight to require a response. You're treating it as though it's a real threat to your identity. And in doing so, you give it power it never had on its own. A lie doesn't need you to refute it to be false. It's false whether you speak or not. Your defense doesn't make it less false. It makes it more important. It elevates a mischaracterization to the level of something worth contesting. And the person who made the characterization watches you scramble, and they learn something about you. They learn that this is where your buttons are. They learn that this is the lever. And whether they're conscious of it or not, they now have a tool. Robert Greene understood this deeply. He observed that the person who is misunderstood, underestimated, mischaracterized, and who does not rush to correct the record, holds a profound strategic advantage. Because people act based on their perception of you. And if their perception is wrong, their actions will be miscalibrated. They'll underestimate your resolve. They'll misjudge your next move. They'll prepare for a version of you that doesn't exist. And you, moving silently behind their incorrect model, have room to operate. Being misunderstood is not always a liability. Often, it's a cloak. The Stoics would call this detachment. Not coldness. Not indifference. Detachment. The ability to hold an outcome at arm's length and say, I see this. I acknowledge this. But this does not define me. This does not dictate my internal state. This is weather, not climate. Seneca lived this. He was exiled. He was accused of things he didn't do. He was mischaracterized by people who had every reason to misread him, because misreading him served their interests. And in his exile, cut off from the circles of power and influence that had defined his public identity, he discovered something that only isolation can teach you. He discovered that the person who needs to be understood by others has made himself a prisoner of their attention. And the person who has stopped needing that has, in that very moment, become free. Not free in the political sense. Free in the only sense that ultimately matters. Free in the interior sense. Free in the sense that no external verdict can reach the part of you that decides who you are. Now I want to be clear about something, because this is where a lot of people get confused. This is not about becoming cold. This is not about cutting yourself off from people. This is not about pretending you don't care about anyone's perspective or that feedback is useless. The Stoics were not loners. Marcus Aurelius was an emperor who dealt with people constantly. Epictetus was a teacher surrounded by students. Seneca was deeply embedded in Roman political life. These were not men who withdrew from human interaction. They were men who changed the terms of their engagement with it. And the terms were this: I will listen. I will consider. I will even adjust when someone shows me something I missed. But I will not beg for understanding. I will not grovel for correct perception. I will not spend my energy constructing a case for my own basic decency. Because if I have to argue for my decency, I've already lost. Not the argument. I've lost the relationship with myself that would have made the argument unnecessary. There's a difference between wanting to be understood and needing to be understood. Wanting is human. It's natural. It's the desire for connection, for being seen, for the relief of meeting a mind that mirrors your own. There's nothing wrong with that desire. It's beautiful, actually. It's part of what makes relationships worth having. But needing is different. Needing is when the absence of understanding destabilizes you. When it follows you home. When it sits on your chest at 3 a.m. When it hijacks your conversations and your silences and your sense of your own value. That's not desire anymore. That's dependency. And dependency is always a signal that you've placed something outside yourself that should be inside. So the question becomes, how do you move from needing to wanting? How do you downgrade the urgency without killing the human impulse? And the answer brings us back to the thesis. You build the thing inside yourself that you've been trying to extract from others. You become the person who understands you. Which sounds almost too simple. Almost obvious. But sit with it for a moment. How often do you actually understand yourself? How often do you sit with your own motives, your own contradictions, your own mixed feelings, and hold them clearly in your own mind without flinching? How often do you say to yourself, I did that thing, and I did it partly out of love and partly out of fear, and both are true, and neither one cancels the other? Because here's what I've noticed. The people who most desperately need to be understood by others are almost always the people who least understand themselves. They're outsourcing a job they haven't done internally. They're asking someone else to provide the clarity they've refused to develop. And when the other person can't provide it, because no one can, because no one has access to your interior the way you do, the cycle restarts. The hunger returns. The explanation is rehearsed again. The argument is replayed. The gap between what you meant and what they heard widens into an abyss. And you fall in. So the practice, the real practice, is self-understanding. Not self-justification. Not self-defense. Self-understanding. Sitting with yourself the way you wish someone would sit with you. Listening to your own contradictions the way you wish someone would listen to yours. Holding your own complexity without rushing to simplify it into a narrative that's easier to defend. This is not comfortable work. This is not the work that makes you feel good in the moment. This is the work that makes you feel solid over time. Unshakable over time. The kind of solid where someone can completely misread you and you feel a flicker of discomfort, and then it passes, because you know who you are. Not because you told yourself. Not because you repeated it until you believed it. Because you did the work of actually looking. Let me give you a concrete practice. Tonight, or tomorrow morning, or whenever you next have 5 minutes alone. Take one interaction where you felt misunderstood. Just one. And instead of rehearsing what you should have said to them, ask yourself what you were actually feeling. Not what you were entitled to feel. Not what was justified. What you were actually feeling. Were you hurt? Were you afraid? Were you angry because underneath the anger was sadness? Were you defending a position because admitting the other person had a point would have cost you something you weren't ready to pay? Sit with that. Don't fix it. Don't narrate it. Just sit with it. And notice what happens. Notice how the urgency to be understood by them starts to dim, just slightly, when you understand yourself. Notice how the external hunger quiets when the internal feast begins. Notice that you are, in that moment, the only person whose understanding you actually needed. And you gave it to yourself. This is what Epictetus was pointing at when he talked about what is within your power. Your understanding of yourself, that is within your power. Your willingness to look honestly at your own motives, that is within your power. Your decision to stop demanding that someone else do for you what you haven't done for yourself, that is within your power. What someone else concludes about you, that is not within your power. It never was. It never will be. And the sooner you stop pretending otherwise, the sooner you'll stop bleeding energy into a battle you were never going to win. There's a particular kind of silence that comes from this practice. Not the silence of suppression. Not the silence of swallowed words and unspoken rage. A different kind of silence. The silence of someone who has nothing to prove. The silence of someone who knows that their truth doesn't require an audience to be true. Marcus Aurelius wrote to himself, in his private journal, that the best revenge is to be unlike the person who wronged you. But there's a deeper version of that. The best response to being misunderstood is to be unlike the version of yourself that needed to be understood. To be the person who has moved past that need. Who has graduated from that hunger. Who stands in the quiet center of their own self-knowledge and looks out at the noise of mischaracterization and says, without bitterness, without resentment, without contempt, you don't see me. And that's okay. Because I see me. And that's enough. That's the refrain I want you to hold. That's the line I want you to return to when the pull comes, when the urge to explain rises, when the anxiety of being misunderstood tightens your chest. I see me. And that's enough. Not as an affirmation. Not as a mantra you repeat until it loses meaning. As a statement of earned truth. Earned through the practice of looking at yourself honestly. Earned through the discomfort of sitting with your own contradictions. Earned through the repeated choice to let someone be wrong about you rather than deplete yourself trying to correct them. Because here's what happens on the other side of this practice. You don't become cold. You become clear. You don't become distant. You become present. You stop performing your innocence and start living your complexity. And paradoxically, the less you need to be understood, the more people actually understand you. Not because you explained better. Because you stopped explaining. And in the absence of your defense, something else became visible. Something that doesn't need words. Something that people sense before they can articulate it. A person who doesn't need anything from them. A person who is complete. And that completeness is magnetic. Not because it attracts people who understand you, it might not. but because it frees you from the exhausting performance of seeking understanding. It gives you back the energy you were spending on explanation. It gives you back the sleep you were losing to rehearsed arguments. It gives you back the part of yourself you were holding hostage to someone else's perception. You wake up one morning and the argument is still there in your memory. The person still doesn't get it. They probably never will. And for the first time, you notice that this doesn't bother you. Not because you've numbed yourself. Not because you've decided not to care. But because you've finally placed the need to be understood in its proper position. Not at the center of your life. Not as the condition for your peace. As a preference. A gentle, human preference. One that you can hold without being held by it. And in that shift, everything changes. Not the world. Not them. You. You change. You become the kind of person who can be misunderstood and still sleep at night. Still love people. Still show up. Still speak your truth when it matters. But never again beg for it to be recognized. Never again build a case for your own right to exist as you are. Never again hand someone the keys and then wonder why you feel locked out of your own peace. Needing to be understood is not a desire for connection. It is a surrender of your sovereignty. And the moment you see that, truly see it, not as an idea but as a lived, embodied understanding, the keys come back to your hands. The door is yours. The house is yours. You are yours. And you don't need anyone to understand that for it to be true. Stay sovereign.